Hey guys, welcome to Jerry's Live. Today is episode JL124, and you may notice we're actually not live. I mean, we're Jerry's Live, but we're not currently live. Today I'm actually in Virginia Beach competing in the Great Dane National with my puppy Ripley. I think there's 500 and something Great Danes that we're going to be competing against, seeing if we can win some points and a little bit of fame at the Great Dane National. So what I've decided to do, and everybody here, and Katie was right behind me, grinning Katie over there, we're doing an oil painting from start to finish, because kind of one of the real things that's a drawback about doing a live 1 hour show is, as you guys know, I usually can't get an entire work done because we have to talk about the products and field questions, and everybody always wants to see, what it looks like at the end. And sometimes I get a chance to do that, and sometimes my schedule just doesn't allow it. So we decided that since we had a little bit of time ahead of time, that we would do this. We would speed it up so you'll get to see the actual painting from the beginning to the finish. So before we get started in that, I want to show you some of the items that I'm using. I made a very small, simple cart. That's all the things you need to go ahead and start painting. We've got the LUKAS 1862 19-piece Deluxe Wood Box Set that actually comes with a palette. So it's got an easel built into it so you can adjust it. It actually comes with a canvas, so you don't have to get the panels that I included. I just put some panels in that are new ones that we've got that I wanted to really give a try, that are bigger so it's easier for you to see for this demo. Got a wood palette. It's got brush cleaner, linseed painting oil, a palette knife, and they include 3 bristle brushes. It also has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tubes that are the nice full-size, 60 milliliter tubes, I believe, of oil paint. So you've got a very good selection of colors that are all you really need for just starting out with oil paint. Then what I included with this, everybody knows how much I love the Hamburg brushes because I helped develop those. With those bristle brushes, this gives you kind of a nice workhorse in the middle with a bunch of different sizes and some nice little detail brushes. So it gives you kind of that look and feel of mongoose, kind of in between the really stiff bristle and really soft, refined, like a Kolinsky, that really helps with doing the majority of your painting. Then just some really small little willow charcoal sticks for drawing that underdrawing. You need your little either solvent or linseed oil cup. I'm going to use it for the linseed oil to thin the paint to make it a little bit more brushable. Then we've got these new Soho canvas panels. They've got a core that's not going to warp on you. It's acid-free. It's got a great, nice, bright white finish. It's actually a really nice texture. It'll take the paint well. So we're trying those Soho canvas panels today in kind of an odd 14 by 18 size. I'd never used that. I thought it'd be kind of fun. And then just from here, we're going to have a still life. So it's some glassware that I brought from home. One's a little antique vase that was my great-grandmother's. So I thought that would be kind of fun and bright and happy to give a try on. So this is JL124. If you're looking at any time for these supplies, you're going to go to the jerrysartorama.com website, type in JL124, and that will pull up all these items for you to be able to see. So let's get painting. All right, so first I've got the paints laid out, and I'm going ahead and starting the charcoal drawing with the vine charcoal, or willow charcoal in this case. Really, I wanted the emphasis to be mostly on this little antique vase, so I didn't necessarily ghost in the others, just kind of in a quick outline to compare them against each other. I knew that I wanted the vase that shape and kind of had planned in my head where the other shapes were going to go behind it and was fine with that composition. Now, something that I didn't do here, just because I wanted you to be able to see the charcoal drawing well, that sometimes I will do on surfaces at home, is I will take a ground and paint kind of a transparent color over that's thinner, that'll dry very quickly, that tones that panel or canvas so that it's kind of a nice mid-tone instead. It makes it easier. You don't have to put as much paint on necessarily. Sometimes that mid-value range can kind of help bring a painting up faster. But I really didn't want it for this because I haven't painted on these panels. I really wanted to see what the thinner layers were like in different colors, if that made any difference. That's kind of how I formulate things when I try new products. So kind of trying to tweak the drawing here and there. Some people want that drawing absolutely dead, to rights at this point before they start painting. I'm kind of a tweaker constantly, so I'm always adjusting here and adjusting there in paint because I think that sometimes a drawing can look right, and then when you're getting color on, it's different. So I trust the drawing enough just to kind of block in the areas and then go from there. All right. So now I'm going to start putting on what kind of would be the ground otherwise with the with just some thinned paint. I think I'm using a little bit of Gamsol here just to thin it enough to make it brushable so it'll dry a little more quickly, but it's just toning that, kind of giving it a background color in basic colors for how I'm going to kind of work with from there. Now, using willow or vine charcoal, something to note, it can be very smeary and messy if you don't have a lot of experience with it. You can see in some of the areas as I'm working along where you can see on the light colors, it picks up a little bit and drags a little bit of the charcoal. If you're not used to that, it can be very troublesome and annoying and upsetting even. But I guess because that's what we used in college, I actually kind of depend on that to help with the outline of the drawing sometimes. An alternative to that is you can use a rag and kind of dust some of it off first before you apply the paint. Or you can even take a workable fixative and very lightly fix it. You just don't want a lot because you want that adhesion for the first layer of paint to be really good, which if you douse it with fixative, then that's kind of giving you kind of a shell in between where that paint's not going to really sit on your panel as well. So as I work with some of the different colors, you'll be able to see it lift up a little bit, but it doesn't really bother the painting as a result. So here, just trying to start finding a little bit of kind of the shadow and the shapes. They won't stay those colors. It's just kind of, I will pick neutral colors to kind of go in and pick those shadows out, just to kind of ground the items before I start working on them. So now I'm just kind of starting to work into kind of those edges. You can see some of them being wetted a little bit darker. Now with that canvas reflects light that the items are sitting on and actually appears much lighter than I've got it in the picture. There's a reason for that. You don't want to use your whites and really light colors initially right away because they take much longer to dry, especially titanium white and things like that. So you're going to want to save those for later. So it's easier to actually start with earth tones or kind of a middle ground that's a faster drying paint and put that on first and then do your glazing of your lighter colors over it. That also helps when you go to do shadows. The darks are already there, so it's not as difficult to manage those, but it's much easier to kind of be able to get those final whites and have them on the top so they're drying last. Remember, kind of with that fat over lean concept. Now, I really did like the easel box that this little set comes with. It's very easily adjustable. Even with, I'm kind of rough when I put those under paintings on. I really scrub the pigment into the surface so that it bonds on really nicely. It didn't rock or move or give me any issues like that. So that was very pleasant. I appreciated that it didn't move around. It didn't really slide or slip because, even just face it, some regular easels don't grip panels very well. This was designed to hold a panel in it pretty nicely, so I was pretty impressed by it. All right, so now we're getting the color ready to go to get kind of the underpainting of kind of a base mid-tone going on this. I think what I was doing when it kind of got quiet there and nothing was happening was just kind of observing the
kind of the still life and starting to mix some underpainting colors and just kind of getting everything ready to go and really start in here. I think I said in the outro for this, but this painting was done over about 6 hours total. And Will has been kind enough to speed this up for us. So it required a lot of fast working and kind of I guess an evening in between to stop to let it dry enough to do the second layer on. This area is the first day. So all I'm trying to do here is starting to kind of block in just very basic color. You don't want to start getting crazy too soon and, putting in your highlights and things like that, because remember, those are going to be lighter colors, so they're going to involve more white in them. And here, this is a clear glass handle, right? So you have to kind of look at the shadows and shapes that make it up with the colors that it reflects through, and kind of use that to help, because it's clear you're not going to be able to use white. And the more you add white to colors, it's going to make them opaque, right? So then it makes them lighter too. So you can't really use that for the handle. So I'm going to have to kind of depend on the clear white of the canvas there. The ribbon on this glass, I immediately regretted using this glass because, it's funny. It was a set of 4 that I had. This is the remaining one because I tend to break glass really easily. And I just love it. So I wanted to use it for the still life, but that ribbon was, because you can see through it, was so difficult, and trying to get that shape and the reflections in it where it didn't look awkward as I was painting was a little bit stressful. So you'll see it comes off better later. The blue, there's I think a cerulean blue in the set, or a cobalt blue, and a Prussian blue. So not the best range for mixing blues, but thankfully this glass, it ended up working perfectly for it. Prussian blue typically is usually like an ultramarine and a black pigment, so it helped to kind of make some of those really nice darks and to darken that lighter blue when needed. So at first I was like, oh, not the best mixing blues. Oh, perfect for this. The application of this paint's pretty smooth. I've thinned it down just a touch with Gamsol to make it brushable enough. Because of the beeswax content in it, I find that feels the best mixed with that to thin that. But again, anybody who's watched the show a lot knows I'm not big on the petroleum thinners, which Gamsol is, an odorless, very distilled version of. But just kind of with this beeswax, it's just enough to kind of wet the brush and just to make the paint a little smoother, a little bit more brushable, and it works fantastically well. There's just something in it. It doesn't break down the beeswax too much with that. I would imagine turpentine would not feel as successful as far as personally how I want that paint to feel when I'm applying it. The Gamsol worked really nicely. Here, just starting to kind of add a little bit of blue to the shadows, kind of a bluish gray, starting to kind of carve those out. When you're painting, especially, I mean, it doesn't matter what you're painting, but still life in particular, because you've got shadows, because you've got highlights. It's kind of this fine play in carving out almost positives and negatives in the items, which the shadows, obviously would be the negatives. But kind of bringing them along and kind of carving them out is a way that I feel like which is funny, because in drawing last week with our drawing, I talked about that I'd like to establish those shadows first and establish the darkness of it. Well, that's because it's not color. When you start adding color, it's completely different. So I like bringing them up kind of at the same time, making sure that any colors are in there are reflected, so that kind of helps with stabilizing that item and making it seem plausible that it's grounded, right? It's not just some floating in space item. with the big spiral ribbony glass in the back, the stem and the base were very frustrating because they don't reflect as much color or light, being the last item kind of in the back. So you see a lot of the canvas and the wall and stuff through it. So that was interesting. You can see I started on the stemware and then kind of left it alone because I really wasn't sure what to do or where to go with that. And when in painting, everybody feels that way. Don't stop and walk away. That's okay. That's when you switch and start painting something else. You can see for a little bit, I went to the blue glass and kind of worked on that while I thought about it. To me, painting, especially oil painting, more so than acrylic because of the longer dry time and the application and time and that, is as much about the thought process and stopping and really observing as it is the moment that you're actually applying the paint. To kind of plan out mentally what you're going to do next rather than just go. Because acrylic, it's fine. You can paint over it if you mess it up. With oils, I like to think about it a little bit more. And I've noticed I start doing that with acrylic as well because it saves time rather than getting too far onto something and realizing that there's corrections to be made and then having to paint it out or, take additional time to add that. Here I'm kind of putting a highlight on that ribbon. I've kind of worked in some of those shadows in the base of the rounded part of that ribbon glass just to kind of start finding them. And then now I'm trying to kind of sculpt those highlights out on that red ribbon to make that pop forward, to give it kind of that three-dimensional quality. With this color kind of that I'm putting in the background of the gray, it's a little bit of Prussian blue, a little bit of the yellow ochre, I believe, and a little white, so that it's not a true, I don't even know if I used black in this at all, but remember, Prussian blue does have a little bit of black in it, so it makes for a really nice gray. That's a nice cool color. I want that background, even though there's that blue background, blue of the wine glass, I want the background to be cooler. I want those shadows to kind of help drop away, and then the heat coming forward with that little bud vase. So trying to kind of push that idea further in those shadows so that it makes that red ribbon that's got that kind of orange highlight right in the middle there pop forward a little bit more. Now you can see I just put a little bit of a wash in where it's a little warmer red. That's to get that idea that that's the outside part of the glass coming towards you, because you don't, until you start putting highlights on something, it's a trick of the eye otherwise. So making that warmer there is to kind of, so the viewer visually sees that as coming forward, since I've got the warm colors in the foreground, and then as it goes further back, there's the cooler colors. Now, you can see, still working kind of everywhere all at once, just kind of jumping from one thing to another. I know some people that like to do one object and bring it, up to steam where it's almost completely done or absolutely completely done, and then work on the other ones. But I think sometimes, especially if you're in a timeline crunch, you can tend to forget things and not remember to bring some of the things up together, or just get to a point of where you're just out of time. And then you've got this one thing that's, beautifully rendered, nice, finished, and then other things that, are less successfully so. And so it's just an easier kind of thing for me to bring it all up at the same time. Plus, if you're bringing it all up at the same time, you're getting your values to match easier. We talked about values last week with drawing, but it's the same thing with painting. Just because it's color doesn't make it not any less a value. It's still, your lightest lights of those colors in tints and your darkest darks of those colors in shades. So this is just kind of a way to slowly make sure it's all balancing out. You can see I'm starting to add some little bits of highlights in the glass. Now you can see once in a while, although it's fast, I'm taking a rag and wiping it out, or taking my thumb and wiping it out. It's where I've overpainted something, and luckily you can't hear this because I always make this sound. But the beauty of oil is it doesn't dry right away, right? It's not ink or something like that. You can leave it on there for a little bit and then go back and wipe it out if need be. But I am constantly taking a rag and wiping it out because this is thinner. This isn't impasto where you would need a palette knife or something like that. So, or I'll even take a brush, put it in a little bit of the solvent, blot it out and use that where it's a little wetter to kind of lift that mistake. At this point in this, I was very unhappy with the orange vase. So the bud vase, it wasn't looking three-dimensional. It wasn't looking clear. And I've actually, I think, done one painting of this before when my grandmother gave it to me shortly after college. So it was blah, 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 a long time ago. And I painted it with ochre. So I liked the really natural ochre dried pods with the brown with that orange and kind of made the orange some of those nice browns. But it was behind it. So the ochre was the cooler colors in the front, and then I put all the warmer colors in the background. But I was very happy with that painting. Not so happy with how this was coming along at first. But so I'm spending a lot of time here trying to make sense of that handle. Just because of that blue is back there behind it, and it really reflected through that clear handle, trying to start making it look, which it's finally starting to kind of look that way now where you can see that. And there's a lot of blue reflecting into that orange. So it's getting those shadows and enough of those reflections in where it reads as kind of that blue color coming forth, but not so much where it starts just looking like painted patches of who knows what on that little bud vase. Now, also, at this point, I was very unhappy with the base of the ribbon glass in the back. You can see that it's kind of tilting funny. Later on, I go to correct that, and I'll try to notice that and point it out. But the back line was messed up on kind of where the stem is on the right. You can kind of see there. It's too high, and kind of where the glass was is hidden behind the orange, the little bud vase. So I think I trimmed the excess on the left of the base and kind of add a little shadow to suggest it on the right, just to kind of balance that out. Now with these, this is a play of all of these colors, the vermilion in it, the alizarin crimson, all are transparent, right? Which is great, all fine and dandy. But when you're painting a more immediate style painting like this, where you're not doing a bunch of heavy glaze work where it's going to be built up over, say 6, 10, 12, 14 layers, it's annoying because you can see through it and it leaves that little bit of brush stroke. So right now is where I'm kind of trying to play with how do I put these shadows in where it's more transparent, but it actually is reading as a shadow and not just kind of a smeary color mess. I'm not, transparent paints are important. I'm not the biggest fan of them. And for this type of thinner painting, sometimes it's a little bit frustrating and stressful. That's why it needed that day to dry because at this point you can see that there's a lot of paint on there that's thinned that's going to take a little bit of time to set up before you can kind of keep going over it. And the glass it's hard to see in the picture, but it's like kind of crackly, right? So, which reflects highlights kind of at different places and also gives these kind of weird rounded bulby kind of patches, shapes of the kind of crackle bubbles. So it's a very, and I picked that purposefully to go with the blue, the smoothness of the blue, and then that kind of very, organic winding design of the ribbon glass there, because it kind of gave it some, although it's a smooth glass, it gives it a little bit of visual texture to the overall piece. Now you can see here, as is, the background is incredibly light. It's very washed out. If you squint, which everybody take a minute and squint, you can see that ribbon vase really just disappears into the background. Which that's fine. We were looking to get a ground color on. We didn't want to go, much more than that at first. So now I'm taking that Prussian blue, and it's got a little bit of white in it, and probably just a touch of that yellow ochre. Because remember, adding a little bit of yellow ochre or even an umber for something dark can take some heat out of that color, which I think the set does not have umber. It's got yellow ochre and burnt sienna, so there wasn't the ability of that umber to kind of help with making some of those darks. So I've just kind of made do with that warmer yellow ochre to kind of temper the color. And all I'm doing here is just trying to get in a smoother background color where it's not as kind of thin and washy, just to start making those glasses kind of step forward a little bit more. Now, in going around this, I'm not making a hard-edged kind of, and when I'm painting up against those objects, what I'm doing there, besides trying to get kind of that definition between them, I'm also moving lines a little bit. If I notice it's a little fat in one area, I'm just kind of coming along and edging that line in very smoothly. Or even just to try to get a harder edge. But I also, at some times, which it's sped up so it's harder to see, I will actually soften some edges, because the most successful, in my opinion, painting isn't where everything is super duper sharp. Because if you're going to make every edge super duper sharp, you better be like the Mac Daddy at realism, because people are going to notice things that are off the sharper that you make it. And if everything is sharp, any discrepancies are going to really stand out and be an eyesore. So if you take it and you have your moments in a painting, to quote my sculpture professor Gary from college, he always talked about moments in something, and so I use that a lot. You've got these beautiful moments that are this nice, crisper edge where you've got that contrast of two things up against each other to really make it pop. And then you've got your softer areas that kind of, where some of that dissolves and flows together, just kind of makes it visually more pleasing and as a work, especially in a painting, and makes it more natural looking. You're able to kind of hide perhaps some of the things otherwise that people would visually notice as indiscrepancies. You can start seeing the power of that blue. I added just a touch of some alizarin crimson and a little bit of white, just to kind of make that kind of really beautiful blue violet there in the base of the blue wine glass. Love that color. That really pops with that with the orange there. So now what I'm doing is coming in and really working on those ribbons and working on the shadows that those ribbons cast, where it throws that little bit of color even though there's not really the color right there. This was the hardest part, I think, in the whole painting, and just trying to kind of get that, the edge to look very cut and ribbony, but soft enough where, the bends and the curves all make sense. Just it was kind of a challenge. Now here, just trying to darken that and the inside of that, the blue glass, just to, you could see as I put those little edges in and darkened it, all of a sudden that looks three-dimensional. It really makes it look visually like you could stick your hand down in there, just because it dropped that back. It pushed the perspective of the color. And then down at the bottom where I'm working on that base and kind of putting some darks in, that really helps give it that 3D look and make it look that much more reflective. And that's just that Prussian blue with here and there little bits of the crimson, alizarin crimson, and white added in. And then at times, like in here, I've added a little bit of that lighter blue just to make it so it's still a little violety, but it's not so... it gives enough of a contrast. It's cool and warm blues kind of used together. This part was tricky too. That little bit of that vase that reflects in there. It broke down into geometric shapes, which that was great, but I wanted to, and I think as artists, we always want to make it look just like the other thing. And I had to really stop and go, okay, these are reflected shapes. If you overdo it, that's going to be the focus rather than it just being that kind of natural reflection. So I eased off and just kind of opted for those geometric shapes in there. Now it's back to this dreaded little bud face. And you can see as highlights and stuff start to get kind of put in here, it's starting to look more round. That little bit of the kind of lighter yellow highlights there, and that's very light yellow with some white. That's not white. Just kind of help start to round that out that little bit, and then I've put in that very kind of yellow reflection from the light down up under the bottom. That also helps to kind of, when we talked about the cast shadow, it's different when it's lit from inside like that. It's basically a cast light from kind of coming in and through that actual little vase itself. And now you'll notice I am adding a little bit of, it's almost white. It's just a very super light orange and yellow value to put in with kind of those edges on the lip of that little bud vase. And then now I'm kind of coming back in with kind of some whites and very light grays, trying to kind of define a little bit more the highlights in that ribbon glass. So back to the blue. There's cast shadows from the ribbon glass, which again, a nightmare to try to put on there because it does not reflect exactly as you see it. It reflects these kind of weird, jagged kind of edge lines. So it was kind of starting to figure out what I wanted to do from there, and it started to getting a little overwhelming. So what did I do? Went up and crispened the edge of the mouth part, the mouthpiece part of that glass, just to move to something similar while I kind of thought about it. Move back down to the base just to kind of crisp that up. And then probably drinking a little coffee right there and having to think about it. So at this point in that ribbon glass, that kind of Payne's gray looking shadow was just too harsh. So I'm going back in and really starting to focus on those little bits of shadow, trying to soften them and make them look natural while still reflect as a shadow. Now in this part, I've taken a little bit of that kind of alizarin and Prussian color and just made it a super light tint. So it's almost white. It's a very, I don't even know if it's even a 10% value. But just to make that nice and cool, to make that kind of red sing, and to start kind of reading as the reflection from the background color gray. So at this point, in looking at it here, I can see which keep in mind that the easel box is skewed just a little towards me, right? You're not getting the straight on view. So these are angled a little bit more. The view is skewed of the drawing, but there's some areas of the bud vase and then that base of the regular big glass where there's going to be some corrections made where I could see that my drawing, my underdrawing was off on those. And I'll kind of go back in and kind of cut and correct those just a slight bit. Now, ideally, I love the gray background, but if you really want, more reflected light and really want that ribbon glass in the back to be lighter, you could put a piece of white foam core behind this and have it light more directly on them. In the studio, because of the LED lights, finding a light source is nutty. And if you take something and actually put it on a scene like this, and you've got the light shining down through it, you're still then also going to get all these multitude of crazy cast shadows from everywhere else because of those LEDs all around. There are these probably, I don't even know, 12 by 12 or 14 by 14 inch boxes just littered with tiny little LED lights that are super incredibly bright. Um, that being said, it's where this was, one light in particular was on it, so that's why I opted to stick with that as opposed to bringing in a different light source and not having any control over where that would be. Plus, just the fact that I could block your view of it or my view. There wasn't a lot of place to put it. But if you wanted, doing this at home, doing this in your own studio, if you wanted to really get a crisper look to those and it really the focus to be more on those three items and less on kind of the canvas underneath or that gray background, you could build a base of a foam core and then put two pieces for sides and a corner where you get that nice reflected kind of whiteness of that coming up from the foam core, and that would help kind of you not have to worry about some of these kind of weird colored shadows that I've got. Right there, just a minute ago, you could see I started kind of edging that the base of the glass just to work on fixing it a little bit. Then I got really scared and was like, I need to think about this for a minute. So I stopped and I moved on. So, and as an artist, really, it's smart to do that. A lot of people just stop. They just stop. Sometimes you think too much. You can kind of subconsciously work through these kind of problems in your head if you just continue on to another part, but you're kind of cognizant and always looking back at that one little problem area and going, what am I going to do with that? Now I'm really getting into I want that background to be even a little bit darker. I've got kind of an idea of what I want with it. And I really want that. You can see just outlining that little ribbon glass, just that little bit, all of a sudden really made it stand out. All right, so these shadows, with making that darker than that actual background, again, we discussed this last week with the drawing class, artistic license. These colors don't have to be the colors they are. You can make the blue vase or the blue glass, green. You could make it whatever you want, but kind of playing with that background color really starts, and the value of it especially. We talked about values and contrast. Suddenly this is a much higher contrast piece with that background kind of, that beautiful darkness. Now, I noticed right there, I was working along and noticed the side of that blue vase was very off. So I will go back in and correct it because now I'm kind of thinking about how I want to ultimately fix that. And I didn't want a really harsh line where these two meet. I wanted something soft that was clearly a transition, but that didn't call your attention to it. So it looks like just like some broken dark line kind of popping through there. Now you can see right there, I'm carrying a little bit of that color from the background, even though it's not really in the shadow of those items, in to further ground them, because that's going to make the viewer kind of identify them as shadows, right? So it's just pulling that same color and softening it a little with a little bit of white and kind of tacking that in there. Now you can see in the shadows of the little bud vase, I've put some yellow, I've put a little bit of kind of pink, there's some ochre. Cast shadows are not the same color and the same intensity of your actual item, even if it's glass. Unless it's a light on it that's just so bright shining through, it's still going to be somewhat softened from that, that really intense full color. So in softening those even more, it makes it read as a softer shadow. But using those, the kind of brighter colors as the base and then softening them that are in there is what lets you know for sure that it just in the viewer's eye is going to reflect kind of mentally as that shadow. Now I'm just putting that little bit of red kind of through the blues shadow because it kind of does pass through it there. It's very hard to see on the actual thing itself, but I just played it up because I thought that would be kind of a neat way to kind of lead the eye in and through that blue. And you can see in the as I'm working on the stem of the ribbon glass, I've also put a little bit of reflection from that bud vase in there with that really soft, very faint little orange. It just picked it up just a little in there, and I didn't want it to be too harsh. Now I'm working on trying to address that line of that kind of that base. I've pulled it in with a little bit of a lighter line, just so quickly you don't. I didn't even notice that I'd done it, but now it looks right. Also, the highlights on there help to make it read correctly now. And then it's just on to some of these tricky little reflections that are in that ribbon vase, which it's overwhelming, and it's very easy to be like, I'm not even sure what to do with this. What you need to do with an object like this that has these, these many colors and shapes and all that is read it as shapes. Don't read it the overall outline as the entire item, right? Then really I want you to look at the shadows themselves and read them as shapes, as either organic or very geometric forms, that then you're just adding those together, and it's kind of that amalgamous combination of all of them that are going to read as your item, and that helps you not have the same anxiety over it, because you're going, okay, I don't have to think of this as this glass. I'm going to think of it as these shapes, and then it's just going to become that on its own. And you can see I just trimmed out that little bit of the glass on the lower right hand side of the ribbon glass for the actual glass part of it with an edge. It was a little off, so I just kind of fixed it and enhanced the edge a little bit with a little bit darker value, just slightly touched in there. I didn't go back around and outline everything, because then it would have looked like an outline. I just wanted kind of that nuance tucked in there, for that contrast. Now it's just kind of dealing with, how do I see, I'm right over there, that little bit I'm trying to kind of suggest that base of the glass over there without actually painting it in, so that it just reads as that you assume it's there without necessarily having to see that edge, since I couldn't see that edge, which kind of helps level the rest of it out. Now I'm just enhancing some of those shadows, making them kind of a little bit more color pop, kind of so that color, reflected color, is kind of continuing through the piece itself. Now if you squint, look at it now and you really squint at the piece, you can see more values in it. The clear glass is harder. I could have gone back and darkened some in there, but because I did not have a true dark background like that, I was really afraid to do that for fear of kind of losing some of the control of it, because I'd be manufacturing darker colors away. If I wanted darker colors to really tell with the wine glass, I could just set a piece of paper with even a watercolor wash or something that's that color behind it, and see what it does with it, only on that item, if you wanted, just to kind of develop those shadows further if it bothered you like that, which it didn't really bother me. I kind of like it like that. It makes the glass kind of glow in, so each of them is kind of doing their own little bit of glowing there. So I kind of left it as is. Again, I'm kind of tweaking that line in the back. I did not want it to be hard, but now going back in and making the lights lighter for that canvas, it was all too much the same value. So trying to lighten that up so that it kind of appears that the brightness is there, and then it's kind of going back into that dark. Ideally, the white was still too wet to really do a whole lot with once this piece was done as far as the show was concerned. I would want to go back in and develop that value even further. Not quite as light as the base of the ribbon glass there, or the handle of the, clearly the handle of the bud vase. But I would like it to be a little bit lighter than kind of how I left it. At this piece is uh, at this time, this piece is actually pretty wet all over because I've been painting on it. This is well into the second day of the second period of painting on it. And so luckily it's still a touch wet because I've pretty much gone over the whole painting at this point, even the second day. It was dry to the touch for the most part the first day. So the beauty of that, though, is that I can kind of go in and soften and blend. I can lay a color in by not pushing hard, but by kind of turning the brush on edge and laying that color down. But then I can blend it with the tip of the brush to kind of really, make it flow into each other and look softer like I'm doing for those shadows. Again, cool colors in the background for the shadows, so, to the back of the painting, so that it really makes those drop away subconsciously for that viewer. Which I know I say that a lot, but really you can paint it how you want it, right? For your intention. But overall, in the long run, your success, unless you're just going to keep this home in a closet or on your own wall, or give it to your Nana who thinks that everything you do is amazing. You want to be able to kind of step away from you and your perceptions and see this painting as other people are going to see it, and how subconsciously are these colors going to work together, and what things can I do to make it easier for this person looking at this to read this painting and make accurate observations from it, kind of even put it together in their own head, which we've talked about color theory. If you haven't watched any of our color theory episodes, it's a really good idea because color plays a ridiculously important part in a painter's repertoire as far as how someone is going to view this painting, how colors are going to work together, how successful it's going to be, because colors can work together or not work together either which way, but the success and how they, play well with others kind of thing really depends on kind of your knowledge and how you impart it visually with your work. You see, I'm really bringing up the highlights to that glass looked very flat, but suddenly those little touches of light kind of interspersed here and there are really bringing that base out where it looks very round. It looks like you kind of reach in and pick it up from those reflections. That little edge was getting too dark. I somewhat manufactured that highlight there just to make it a little bit more 3D from having painted some kind of clear items before and watching other people paint them. I like to kind of learn from observation from somebody else, and that little bit of kind of highlight further in to kind of round it out and make sense of that lip, the depth of that, the base of it, how it stands. So it's just not flat looking. It actually lifts it up with that little bit of a highlight. You can see the depth of that glass on the base. Now it's just kind of tweaking some of these highlights, trying to make sense of the color without losing kind of the blue of that stemware, which I just love that, who wants boring, wine glasses? You need stuff that pops, that's, happy. Typical artist, right? Well, I mean, typical artist, you need your wine glasses, but so here now I've had some thoughts and decisions about how that reflection's going to play with that ribbon glass there. And this is kind of the little area that pulls this piece together, because before those two kind of were sitting separate entities in the back kind of the painting, just minding their own business. So putting some of these highlights together, where that ribbon glass is actually affecting the look of the blue glass, kind of makes sense in that you see it's there. It's relating with those other objects now. Now I'm just kind of, this handle was like kind of the one last thing that just bugged me. So now it's just kind of trying to make that pop more forward in front of that blue glass there. And this image is just that little bit skewed. You can see where kind of up in the upper top part of that handle, I darkened it more with Prussian blue. It wasn't that dark in the actual item itself, but it wasn't reading right as far as the kind of reflection back from the glass to me in how I was perceiving it. So I decided to try that darker part and kind of, I like how that obviously drops. You can see that curve that drops back more kind of into that blue glass. It gives that, like I was saying, besides the little bit of kind of blue shadows that look a little bit greenish in that bud vase, that handle having that blue in it then gives it a relation to that blue glass. The same with the cast light off the bud vase into the stem of the ribbon glass. That little bit of orange in there, that reflection resonates where it identifies it with that front item. The same with the ribbon glass reflection in that blue. It identifies it with that that glass. It's they have a relationship with each other now, which is really, you can, combine a still life with multiple things, but unless you give them in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through shadow, whether it's through how they overlap or something like that, unless you make those relationships between the items a constant and strong relationship in how they fit together visually and how they interact with each other, it's not going to be as successful. It reads flatter. That you lose a lot of dimension to me without those relationships. Now with this, I'm just further trying to tweak the look of kind of the crackles without making them too, edgy, cut out, obvious. I want the suggestion to be there. Oh, did you see that little white? I just tapped in that little bit of the outside edge right there of that glass to, because I still wasn't happy with kind of where it was at. Just tapped in a little lighter color. It's not a hard edge or anything, but just to suggest the back of that glass. Kind of wish that I maybe tapped it out just a little further in retrospect. But I think, because again, we're looking at this easel box on a skewed angle, it probably is, the actual work shows it better. Now, to me, this little bud vase looked lopsided on the left at the base. But what it was there weren't enough highlights that rounded it kind of there to really show, because you're kind of looking up over it. You can see down in the top, and you can see a little bit, and you can see kind of over the edge of it. So putting those highlights on kind of pulled that shape back together so that it reads a little truer. Now I'm just kind of at this point deciding where I want these last highlights to be, how bright I want them, because you don't want them overly bright. You don't want them too stark, too much contrast, because then it doesn't read as just a reflection. So it's just kind of, now is the delicate time where decisions between value and contrast kind of need to be made wisely, because up until this point, I'd been flying along pretty quickly, and you don't want to go flying along when you put these kind of last touches in, because it's a good way to kind of get ahead of yourself and maybe make something come up too much and other things not enough. So you'll notice this whole time I'm kind of wandering, as you will, from one object to the other, putting on those little touches, kind of sticking a little in here and sticking a little in there, because I don't want to overdo one specific thing. It's funny that red doesn't make sense there, but it is a reflection in the actual handle itself. There we go. Putting that little bit darker value with that alizarin kind of right on the edge. It's not an outline, but it's kind of where that shadow starts in the glass itself. That just suddenly made that look like the right thickness. It looked too wide at the base before. So it's just kind of that nuance. Sometimes a painting is as much the dance of nuances that end up working together as a whole as it is, the actual description of the subject matter. So now not gonna lie, I'm just nitpicking the handle at this point because it's just like I, I want it to be so dead to rights because it's a very obvious, and it's the one kind of big shape that besides those ribbons you really see, you really look at. So I'm trying to make sure that that's reading perfectly. Just if you watch the show, you know that that's just how I am about stuff. I didn't like how bright that highlight was, so I toned it down. It was just a little too much, kind of along the bottom there. All right, so you can see I'm clearly I'm good with that now because I'm putting these little last bits of the brightest highlight on. Some of it's white, some of it is very, lightly tinted.
So hopefully this has made a lot of sense as far as to how I approach starting a painting and just kind of basically working through something to get to an end result of a relatively finished painting. Now, you could take this and call it done. Some people don't even go this far. Some people want it to be absolutely picture perfect, which, you know me, I'm a perfectionist. That would be great, but I just don't always have the time to get that far along. I think all in all, this took about 5.5 hours to get from just that bare panel to this end result. So hopefully it's given you a little bit of insight and it's maybe stirred a little bit of creative vibes and made you want to go out and just items around your house. Stick them together, get your paints out, oil, acrylic, watercolor, and just give it a go. So next week, I'll be back and we're going to be doing something kind of interesting, trying to talk about more mixed media. A lot of you guys have really requested that. So we're going to be doing something unusual that I saw that I thought would be really fun to do. We're going to be doing a wax resist with watercolor, a mixed media demo, where we're going to be using watercolors, but we're going to be using oil pastels as a wax resist to help with some of the highlights and lighter colors in an actual artwork. So we will be doing that. So again, if there was any items that you wanted to see to get a better look at in this episode, it was JL124. Put that in the search box on jerrysartorama.com and that will pull up the list of supplies that I used to paint the painting here. Take care. We'll see you next week.